Well, I'm not as engaging as Stephen, and not as look. No, are you kidding? Thank you. But I want to thank Stephen, and I want to thank all of our other volunteers as well, because this is such a crucial opportunity for us to do something that actually benefits somebody else other than us. It's, taking care of our neighbor, being a good neighbor. It's definitely about how can we do what's best for not just ourselves using our time and talents, but instead, what can we do for other folks? Because really our gifts are not for us, they're for other people. And so I want to thank all of the volunteers that do so much to bring this together, from our advisors like Andy and Cassie, and our graders like Dylan, and all of our mentors, and of course all of our judges, and everybody else, including Janice, which I want to especially thank Janice for doing, especially Jeremy Shodden, for doing so much of the work that's necessary behind the scenes for us to have an event like this. And this is a great venue, but it's more importantly, it's about great people that are doing all this work. So thank you so much, all of our volunteers, for doing what you do. This does not come off without so much additional help. And so I'd like to thank, finally, Linda. Linda is from DA Davidson, and I'm going to let Stephen give the bio and talk a little bit about her and introduce her. But every single person across this state of Colorado who's involved in the CFA Society Colorado, and folks elsewhere as well, as you can see, Linda coming from elsewhere, are engaged and interested in making sure that we're helping everybody around us in our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. In addition to that, I'd like to thank AJ and Kellen. Thank you. As Peter mentioned, so this is my second year doing this, and it's a lot of fun. And the volunteers, Janice, the AV tech guys, like you guys make our job as volunteers so simple and seamless. So thank you both very much. Pleased to introduce Linda Bolton Weezer from DA Davidson. I'm excited to hear from her because I see here that she's been on both the buy side and the sell side. And we have mostly buy side people in the room, and I'm a sell side guy, but I think it's easy for us in our careers to get in a silo and create biases. So to have someone with expertise from both sides of the fence, I think that's very interesting and appealing. Prior to DA Davidson, she was with B. Riley, Karras and Company in Oppenheimer. And what year was this? Named Best Up and Coming Analyst in the Household and Personal Care Sector? That's a question.
For me?
Yeah. I didn't get a year. It just says you were named Best Up and Coming Analyst. So.
It was a long time ago. It was a long.
That's okay. She holds an MBA in finance from University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Great. And this is interesting, a bachelor's degree in biochem from Wesley College. So maybe you want to talk about that journey from biochemistry to an analyst in equity research. So, and with that, take it away.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And it's a pleasure to talk about Helen of Troy. I'm a senior analyst at DA Davidson, and a lot of my equity colleagues are actually based in Portland, Oregon. And we have a few people in Denver, but I'm based in New York, where we have a big office as well. And I cover 26 stocks in health and beauty leisure. And a lot of my focus is around beauty, toys, health and wellness, housewares, and a few other miscellaneous things. But I've been following consumer companies for the whole time I've been on the sell side, so over 20 years. And so I guess I'll just launch right into Helen of Troy, ticker HELE, as you all know. So I'll give you, I understand that you've all kind of studied the company and done some work on it, but nevertheless, I guess I'd like to give you a little rundown on the history and background of the company, just the way I see it. And I'll kind of try to highlight some of the challenges that the company has gone through in the last few years, and then kind of conclude. I had downgraded the stock more than a year ago, and I recently upgraded back from a neutral to a buy just a couple of months ago. So I'll go through kind of my key thoughts that kind of backed up my decision to upgrade the stock. So just to start out, as you all know, I mean, Helen of Troy is a diversified company, but many, many years ago, it started out, it was founded by Jerry Rubin, and I actually had the pleasure to meet Jerry Rubin. He was just going out as CEO at the time I was kind of looking to pick up the stock. So I actually went to El Paso, Texas, and met him. And he's an interesting gentleman. He was a New Yorker, but he moved down to Texas and got into hair appliances. And so that's what the real roots of Helen of Troy is, the hair electrical appliances like blow dryers and all that. And down in El Paso, they actually have an R&D lab where they run blow dryers, you know, all night long and do all the testing. So I met Jerry and we talked and everything. And then he said, "Where's your bankers? Get them in here. I want to meet with them." So that was very funny. And that kind of illustrated his thinking behind the company. I mean, at that point, it was really a growth through acquisition story. He had made many acquisitions over the years. He was interested in making more acquisitions. The company was run pretty much as a siloed organization without really any shared services or best practices across the organization. And in many deals, they benefited because they had a low cash tax rate because of their incorporation status. So that's kind of the way I found the company. And so Jerry went out of the company and they identified Julian Minnenberg as being a very capable successor. And I also met Julian right in the beginning when he first came in as CEO, and he had run the CAS business, which was a lot of these electrical humidifiers, fans, purifiers that Helen of Troy had acquired. And he was based in Boston, but he was brought in as CEO. And he really transformed the company, because he recognized that while there were some great brands within the company, that the company was not exploiting the opportunities in terms of being able to run them a little bit more synergistically. So he established shared services. He put in best practices in many areas, including in innovation, and did a lot of things to promote and advance the e-commerce capabilities of the company as well. So there's many, many things that Julian did. And under Julian's tenure as CEO, I tried to list out for myself all the different acquisitions. And I don't think I got them all, but Hydro Flask, Dry Bar, Curlsmith, Osprey. And there was a nutritional supplement business that Julian acquired, and it didn't work out. And he determined after 2 years it wasn't going to work out. And he did something that many CEOs can't do, which is that he decided to exit the business that he had acquired, and he sold it for less than he bought it for. But he knew the best decision would be to exit it because they had given it a try to turn it around and he could not. So I actually respect him a lot for that decision. As you know, the company operates in 3 divisions: home, health and wellness, and beauty. And when I started out with the company, the valuation was low on a PE basis. And by the way, PE valuation is probably the best way to look at the company because of the low tax rate. If you were to look at EV to EBITDA, you really wouldn't capture that benefit in the valuation analysis. So really, we use PE valuation. And I would say that the valuation of the stock was enhanced the most, not when they were doing acquisitions, although those accretive acquisitions did help and add to the story, but it was when they were doing consistent, pretty high organic top line growth. Organic sales growth is the key valuation driver in general, I would say, for consumer product companies. And so there was a period of several years in there where they were doing 5 to 8% organic sales growth pretty consistently. And for the industries that I look at, that's actually really high because many of the categories that they're in only grow low single digit. So when you're talking about being able to drive growth of 5 to 8%, that's really impressive. And so Some of it was through innovation. That was one of the key things that drove it. For example, OXO, their kitchenwares business, has over time expanded into more categories besides just what they started in. So there's been a really lot of successful kind of growth and innovation through many brands in the company. So there were many challenges that they kind of came across over the years. So there were tariffs because most of their stuff is made in China. So they were susceptible to the tariffs. And during the pandemic, many of their products were in high demand. So they had some challenges being able to fulfill demand for thermometers, air purifiers. And then post-COVID, there were other challenges to deal with. So the company went through, of course, hard comparisons as they comped that high growth in kitchenwares and air purifiers and thermometers during the pandemic. They also had an EPA labeling issue. The EPA put new regulations in, kind of tightening down on how you labeled certain health and wellness products. And then also, more recently, there's been a lot of retail inventory reduction, and that is affecting durable goods companies much more than consumables companies. So those are the recent challenges. So my upgrade a few months ago was based on just a few key things. So number one, the valuation had gotten real low once again. So after years of PE expansion, the PE had collapsed after all these problems that they had. Secondly, my belief that the worst was behind them in terms of the biggest declines of revenue and earnings, and that going forward, there would be an improvement or an acceleration in growth, even if it was still down, less down. So I detected that I felt there was an inflection point. They also started a restructuring program to cut some costs. They also decided to examine their portfolio and exit or sell some more businesses that were not as attractive. And then I also identified what I felt was an inflection in cash flow performance. So they actually had a fiscal year of negative free cash flow, which is a very bad thing, but part of that was because of cash spent on a distribution center. And so I felt I could identify when the inflection point came and when we could have visibility on improved cash flow. So those are really the key things that drove my upgrade. So here we are. So my upgrade occurred, I don't know, it was about 95 or 90, something like that per share. So far the stock is kind of working since my upgrade. It's been moving upward, and we've had some bear reports come out about the company. So I've had to defend my buy recommendation against those bear reports. But I feel good about the upgrade, and I feel like all the developments that have occurred more recently have solidified my view that this is kind of a second turnaround by Julian. And most of all, I have a lot of confidence in management. I think management quality is something that's important when you look at stock selection and investments. So that's kind of my summary of the whole thing. But I'd be happy to answer any specific questions behind my thinking or any factual stuff you have, or anything about the analysis of Helen of Troy.
All right, great, thanks. And sorry, I apologize in advance. You got stuck with the bond guy as your question asker, so, but very familiar with David Davidson. Run into him all the time, especially in Colorado on the municipal underwriting side. You guys really good presence here in the Pacific Northwest. So,
Stephen, I think we have a question right here. If they jump back here, do we have a mic?
we have a roving mic. There we go. I'm off the hook. This is great. Lucky you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Linda? Great.
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going through that. One thing I'm curious about is, are you positioning them in the toiletries and cosmetics industry, or how do you what are the peers that you're looking at with a company that has such diversified business segments?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. And I get asked that by clients all the time. Of course, as a diversified company, there's no perfect comparable. But one company that's similar in some ways to Helen of Troy is Newell. NWL is the ticker. And Newell has also, that's a company I used to follow years ago, so I'm kind of familiar with it. And it has some of the same similarities in the sense that they have some durable goods businesses in Newell, and they may have some consumables, but it's mostly durable goods really as well. So, and Newell has gone through some fits and starts, and they acquired a lot of businesses and divested businesses, et cetera. So there is a way of maybe comping it to that. And one of the things I point out is there was a period of time where Newell was going through a period of really strong, consistent, fairly strong, mid to high single digit organic sales growth. And Newell in its heyday hit a high PE ratio on forward earnings. I want to say it was maybe 22 times earnings, or maybe even a little higher. It really garnered quite a high valuation. So sometimes when I tell people about Helen of Troy, I say that I think Helen of Troy's management is even better. And quite frankly, Helen of Troy's portfolio might be better, especially since Helen has started to acquire more consumables companies. So two of their most recent acquisitions, Drybar and Curlsmith, are consumable hair products. Those are valued much higher than durable goods companies. So that's a valuation enhancer. So I would argue that it should get at least the prior peak valuation of Newell if Helen can get back to an organic growth cadence. So that would be one comp. I mean, other companies that are diversified, I mean, there's Spectrum Brands, SPD, there's Compass Diversified Holdings, which is CODI. Those are some of the ones that jump to mind, but if I really had to name one that seemed most similar, it would probably be Newell.
Okay, before that first question, you were talking about your upgrade and you mentioned the strong management or good management. How do you define that, or what do you think the factors are? What do you base that decision on versus you said you feel that their management is good? How do you define that, or why do you think that?
Well, let's see. Let me think of what I like about Julian, because I think he is very strong. I think a clearly articulated strategy that people can understand with clear targets, whether they be midterm or long-term targets, but something to be working toward. The conveyance of metrics that investors can understand. The recognition of where you can get cost synergies and efficiencies in a company, especially in a diversified company, an ability to shepherd the innovation process successfully. You know, there's a varying degree of prowess and innovation among consumer product companies. And I think Julian knows how to innovate. And let me tell you, he's working with some categories that are difficult. And it's more difficult in durable goods because the consumer makes a purchase decision more infrequently. With shampoo, you buy it every month or every 2 months or something. But you know, if it's a durable good, like a kitchenware item, you may only buy that item once every 5 years. So, you know, it's tough to influence the consumer decision unless you have really strong innovation to get their attention. But Julian does all of that. I think what Julian did with the divestiture of the acquisition that didn't work out, he swallowed his pride and he did the right thing for the shareholders of the company. So I do regard him very highly for that. And just being very determined towards success and being a leader, somebody who can lead other people, and then recognizing when he needs to add people. Like, so for example, they just added a very high quality president of the company, Noel Joffrey. And so that's something that he recognized he needed. He needed to add to the team. So these are all, you know, discipline in making acquisitions, having specific acquisition criteria. These are all things that kind of label him as a good leader and a good CEO, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. We have another question.
Thank you so much. How would you describe Helen of Troy's acquisition growth? Like with Curlsmith growing and kind of punching way higher than it should, do you think that that was part of the plan or more of like a pleasant surprise to expand globally?
Um, well, I'm not sure I'm quite understanding your question because Curlsmith is a prestige hair care brand, and it followed on the acquisition of Dry Bar, which is another prestige hair care brand. So it kind of fit right in with that. So it made total sense. And to my knowledge, Curlsmith is mostly a domestic company. So I'm not sure I'm understanding your question about international expansion. Now, Osprey was another recent acquisition, which is kind of like highly technical backpacks and things like that. And Osprey is more international. Osprey has a good presence in Europe and some other international markets. I think almost 50% of the sales of Osprey are international. So that's actually something that could be a benefit to Helen of Troy because they've been trying to expand their other products more internationally, and they might be able to utilize some of the distribution channels of Osprey abroad to bring in some of their other durable goods through those same channels. So it may be that you're mentioning the Osprey acquisition. That's the one they've done recently that's the most international.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You touched on my next question a little bit. Thinking about the durable goods, I love OXO good grips. I have in my kitchen, but to your point, I've had my can opener for 7 years or something, right? So we heard a lot of talk about recession today. I didn't hear, if you add in inflation to that and products that last a long time, like a Hydro Flask, do you feel there's a risk of substitution if we enter recession combined with high inflation where the consumer has to replace it? They go to Target, Walmart, Costco, whatever, and buy a cheaper brand.
Yeah, so those are some important issues. Well, I guess first of all, on the kitchenware side of it, a lot of their products are actually fairly low in price point. And so you mentioned a can opener, for example. Well, when your can opener does go bad and you need to run out and buy a new one, I don't know if you're going to scrutinize whether that can opener is $7 or $7.50.
Fair point.
So, it's kind of an easy purchase decision when it's a fairly low price point. Now, some of the products, for example, Curlsmith and Dry Bar that Helen of Troy have are actually quite high position. They're considered prestige. That type of consumer is the most recession resistant. They are the consumers who will most keep up their purchasing habits. And again, some of their products are very need driven, especially in the health and wellness area. So thermometers, now that's going to have its ups and downs based on what the flu season and the pandemic, is doing. But in general, if you wake up in the morning and your child is sick and you know you've got a thermometer somewhere, but you can't find it, you're just going to run out and get another thermometer. That's a real need-based item. So a lot of their items are like that. But yes, I would consider Helen of Troy to be a soft cyclical. So you will, in a big recession, you will have some demand diminishment. There will be some POS decline, modest. So I wouldn't say 10% decline, but maybe low single digit decline. But right now, the key challenge in the macro environment is more the retail inventory reductions. And that is the much bigger impact on their current sales declines than the demand situation right now.
You just answered my next question. So, okay, great. Good. Get me off the hook. Appreciate that.
I think my mic is on, right? Let's get the mic. So kind of following up to what you just said about, retail sales decreasing. One of the things we touched on in our presentation is how they have Amazon, Target, and Walmart as their 3 biggest customers. So how do they, mitigate that risk when retailers are possibly reducing inventory on their shelves? And also, how do they work with companies like Target and Walmart that might be selling, products that compete against Helen of Troy products? What does that relationship look like?
So Walmart, Target, and Amazon, you're right, are key customers. of Helen of Troy's products. So all consumer product companies will be supplying into channels and retailers. They have all kinds of competing products. So competition is the name of the game. So Helen of Troy has to compete for shelf space. They have to compete for the consumer's attention through merchandising, advertising, innovation, newness, all of this stuff. So that is what the competencies that Helen of Troy needs to focus on, continuing to work on, are all those things that will help them to be an attractive supplier to those retailers. So in terms of when retailers are reducing inventory, there literally is nothing that the suppliers can do. And so I'm also seeing big inventory reductions in the toy space right now. So when Walmart fails to place their order because they want to reduce their inventory, there is literally nothing that can be done. So increasingly, consumer product companies have DTC, direct to consumer businesses, where they sell on their own website. And Helen of Troy has that. And Helen of Troy has a pretty high percentage. It's 15 to 20% of their sales are DTC. And so they are working on that competency, and that can mitigate. So if you have a big DTC business and consumers still want your product, they're still going to be buying it, and they can buy it from you directly. But you can't get away. When there's inventory reductions in the channel, you can't escape it, and it causes big revenue declines. And that's what Helen of Troy is experiencing right now. However, investors understand that it's temporary. If you're still selling things to the consumer, but it's just the retailer who's not buying any more inventory, well, eventually their shelves will be empty. And so the retailer will come back and order. It just may take 6 months, 7 months. It sometimes is hard to gauge, but it will end. And so a lot of times investors view that as an investment opportunity. Buy a great company when they're experiencing a temporary problem, which is the inventory reductions by the retailers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. We have one more last question before we wrap up. When you're talking to investors, what are the most questions you get, or is one that pops to the top of your mind that like most investors ask you about their risks or this stock, this company?
In particular for Helen of Troy.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the analysis of the business relative to the strength they had during the pandemic is something that people are trying to analyze a lot. So because they had very big demand for thermometers, air purifiers, but actually Hydro Flask was impacted negatively because that's an out of doors water bottle thing, and that actually declined in the pandemic. But people are trying to gauge, like, is the company over earning? Because that was a huge surge. And so how much do you have to come down before you're getting to a base level of revenue and earnings? So I would say that's the key thing that people are trying to figure out. But I would tell you, it's not like everybody bought a thermometer during the pandemic and now there's no thermometers being sold. That's not the case at all. People have thermometers, they can't find them, they break them, they lose them, and then they buy another thermometer. There are always thermometers being sold. And, so I think, but that is something that investors are really looking at right now, is this was a darling during the pandemic, the stock, and they want to gauge, like, what's the normal level, for Helen of Troy.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. And on that note, we can end. That's a great way to end. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Linda, for being here, and thanks for helping enlighten the students. So.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me.
Great. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you again to everybody for presenting today. It's just so much fun to see the different teams, and every team is a little bit different on their angle. I don't know, was it a rule that you could not have a neutral? Did everybody have to have a buy or a sell? Well, that was something that judges really appreciated, is that you either had a buy or a sell. And when you work in this world, I was an equity analyst for about a decade, and I think I tried to roll into a meeting one time with a neutral rating, and I learned very quickly that does not fly. and my bosses would always tell me, at any point in time, you're either a buy or a sell. You're either going to buy more, or we should sell the stock. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. And John, I think Jonathan was mentioning that they beat up a sell side analyst one time who had a neutral. The sell side firms are notorious for having neutrals on stocks. You're like, what's going on? So anyway, thank you. I know one of the teams flew in for this. I think that's incredibly commendable. We really appreciate that you did that, and for all the teams, all the time and effort you put into this. My position's kind of unique. I was a team advisor in the past. I've been a written report judge, and I've been a live judge several times. So it's just always a blast. And I actually have a history with Helen of Troy. When I was a fixed income analyst, my company led the debt financing when they bought Oxo in 2004. So I went down there several times, met with their CEO at the time, and I've known this company pretty well, although they've changed significantly since that point, and they're a much different company now than they were then. The judges really enjoyed this as well, and I kind of wanted to open it up to the judges and just ask what you enjoyed the most about today. And any of you can go first, and you don't all have to answer, but I'm just curious what you thought of the day.
Part of what I enjoyed was seeing the team dynamics. You can see where people are trading off and who's the expert in what section, and it's more obvious than you would know, and that's a fun sort of dynamic to watch. And I think across the board, everybody was trading off pretty well in answering the questions and that. So congratulations on that across the board.
I thought it was great to see the breadth of answers you can come to. You know, we had a couple of people that had sell recommendations, we had a couple of people that had buy recommendations, and yet they're looking at the same company. So based on your perspective or what you value as the most important criteria or dynamic within the organization really leads you to a different conclusion. And I think that also that goes back to what this job is a lot. There's a lot of subjectivity that goes into it. And so your own opinions really inform your answer at the end of the day.
I love that answer, actually, Allison, because every single day that the market opens, there are buyers and sellers. They're on opposite sides of the same transaction, and somebody thinks that both sides think they're making the right decision, and somebody is and somebody isn't, it turns out. But I agree with you. That was very fun for me to see 3 buys and 2 sells.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, there's a lot of divergence of the recommendations, but certainly a lot of conviction behind them. So it was good to see that.
Yeah, I think we had maybe a $60 price variance between the highest and lowest share price target.
Yeah, I'd also just say I thought it was very commendable. 10 minutes is a very short period of time to convey a lot of information, and all the teams did a really impressive job of that and staying on right on time. And a couple people were cut off when they were saying about their last 3 or 4 words, but other than that, I mean, you guys were right on the time limit, so it was impressive.
Did the judges, any of you, learn anything that you didn't expect you would learn today? It's kind of a strange question to ask, but did you have any moments where you're like, I never thought of that before about this company or this industry?
I learned about income elasticity of different chapters. So that was good.
That was creative. That was good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
The Q&A, you could really tell when you added to your credibility a lot when you pulled in other factors that weren't necessarily on your presentation. And when someone didn't know something and they said, I don't know, that it's a little tougher here, but when you get that in a meeting and then someone really follows up, you get big points for that, just for future reference.
That's true.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I feel so strongly about that. There's nothing wrong with not knowing the answer, but the most compelling thing as an analyst is to dig deep, find out the answer, and then follow up to the person who needs the information. So it's a great point.
Pretty much every team I saw noted the debt load and making all these debt financed acquisitions, and some people viewed that as a significant negative. Others viewed it as a significant positive. I just thought that was a pretty interesting observation that to look at that and with this the higher interest rates, you would think that that could be a growing burden on the company, but maybe they'll finance it out. Who knows? They seem to have a smart view there. What are some maybe general positives that you saw today from the teams or things that you think worked well in the analysis? Maybe we'll start with the financial analysis specifically. Did anything stand out as something that you appreciated that you saw from some of the teams that was helpful?
I think some of the slides related to the industry and the peers, as well as the breakdowns of the market share, were very helpful.
Mhm.
Well, and also industry dynamics. And I think someone had some bullet points of like what the company's opportunities were within that industry dynamic. So it was kind of relating a couple of subjects together and I thought they did a good job of like tying the company specifically to those industry trends.
Were there any things that you thought from that financial analysis perspective could have been better? Maybe something that a lot of teams leaned hard on that maybe in your professional life you would think that wouldn't be as important?
I'd say, I mean, one place where I would have preferred to see some of the teams go deeper is a little around market share within the segments. I think there was some broad kind of commentary about market shares, but kind of knowing how strong some of the brands were within their specific market segments, I thought would have been additive to the analysis. Admittedly, though, there's a lot to cover in a short period of time, so you can't be all things to all people.
But where it's a standout, sometimes you can highlight where it's a standout in that. And for me, the margins, and there is information on that, the operating margins and that can tell you quite a bit about how successful a company is in what segments. And that there were people who focused on it, and that was really useful, I think.
Well, and maybe doing a little bit of forecasting or thinking about each segment separately. They have several different divisions, thinking mostly, beauty and outdoors. Very different industries, probably very different market dynamics, and how those segments perform on their own, and then how they can roll up together to kind of give a consolidated picture of the entire company. Because sometimes I think we lose some of the detail in the consolidation when you have a very different businesses like that.
And maybe just to add on a little bit too, that I think most of the teams, if not all of them, mentioned Project Pegasus, maybe a little bit deeper analysis of the cost savings associated with that and how that would impact the margins going forward might have been helpful.
And also, it relates to Project Pegasus, but just in terms of management, the closer you can tie what the financial statement analysis is to management, what management is doing, and speak about it in that terms, it's interesting. It gives the company a personality, and it really adds to the analysis. It adds a lot if you can tie those two things together, what you're seeing and what management and the people there are doing and what their backgrounds are. And again, it's short time, but if you can do that a little bit, that's helpful.
On the slides, Ronnie mentioned it already about one of the slides that some of the teams had presented where they showed competitors. What are some other strengths you saw in slides in general? And what are maybe some things where you would have liked to have seen more presented in the slides?
You called it a heat chart. I like that. There was a heat chart in there with color coded, and that was really whoever did the color coding like that a lot.
I think some slides may have been a bit too crowded with data, so perhaps breaking it down into one or two more might get your point across more succinctly.
Yeah, there's definitely some pretty wide divergence on people packing a lot into one slide versus having far more slides. And just like in writing and speaking, sometimes less is more. When you're doing these presentations is a broad observational that doesn't have to be an end all. It's just a broad observation. On the Q&A, did you think that that there should be a different cadence on how people answer? Did it seem that at times some teams just had one person answer? And would you think that there's ways that people could improve on that Q&A component?
I think one or two of the teams seem to have a designated person for each category of question, and I thought that was a very effective way. I mean, part of that is anticipating the types of questions you're going to get, and I think that was well done by some of the teams. It's maybe a model to use.
There's also risk in that as well. If all the questions focus on one area, then unfortunately one person is going to end up answering. So there's pluses and minuses. Yes, it's great to have your sector expert, but you do have a risk. And maybe at that point, someone else would need to step in. Or I also thought a lot of teams did a good job of following up. If one person answered it, but someone else had a point as well, they weren't scared to step in and just add on to that question, which I think actually shows that everyone is participating across the board, which is great for a team project.
Sure. One of the scoring categories was ESG analysis, and that's something that obviously you hear a lot about in the media, and I see it all the time. There's ESG funds, there's ESG indexes. In each of your professional careers and jobs, do you utilize ESG analysis as a prominent factor in your buy and sell decisions?
Well, not as an analysis, but we certainly have a lot of ESG strategies that are part of our approved list at Schwab. So definitely talk to a lot of ESG portfolio managers that how they are using ESG analysis with their buy and sell recommendations.
For us, it is a component. We have a subscription that we utilize. And I will be candid in saying that some of the analysis that we get is great and has good viewpoints, and some of it has some work to do. I think that the providers are also pretty new in this evolution, and they are still working with their own processes. I know we have talked to them directly and even given them feedbacks because they are doing this analysis across thousands of companies, and they've been forced to automate some of it. So a lot of it has to do with what information they can get from a company easily. And I can think of one example where the company has a presentation and they literally have slides E, S, and G. And this particular provider did not pick up on that information. So there's a disconnect. I think we're still at the beginning phases, but it's a component. I think it will be an evolution over the next handful of years.
Yeah, a couple of comments on that. I agree with Allison that we're in this early stage. There's a desire for a couple providers to become the de facto standard. There's also a desire to standardize into a framework that inherently is just hard to do because a lot of these factors are very qualitative in nature. They're not quantitative, and there are inherent limitations to providing a score. And so I think you need to take that into account. On the personal side, we do care about these factors. One of my go-to kind of taglines with people who ask me about it is that as a small cap investor, we've cared about ESG before it was an acronym because governance is wildly divergent among small cap companies. And Peter was referring to this back when Helen of Troy was small. It had some really sketchy stuff going on. They're much better now, as I think most of the teams identified. But companies go through an evolutionary process, and a lot of small cap companies have a very, very wide divergence.
Just briefly, I think it's part of your job as an analyst of a company. When you're covering a company thoroughly, you should know management. And some managements are checking the boxes, and some managements are toeing the line, and you should be able to see that or figure it out as you get to know the management that runs these companies.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of wrap it up here, but to bring that full circle. So I went to visit this company, and the gentleman who was running the company, his name is Jerry Rubin, and his dad started it. And they moved to El Paso from wherever they had started the company. And El Paso is an interesting place. It's a really beautiful town, but you also have a city across the river that has about 1.5 million people who come across the border every day to work. And it is not as beautiful of a city. And so you drive along this freeway and it's staggering. It's shocking, the difference between what's on the left and what's on the right. And right across from what's across the river, you go around this mountain and there's this, one of the slides had a picture, there's this amazing office building up on a hill. And I'm like, holy crap, that's where we're going. And we showed up and we're ushered up to Jerry's office suite, where the first thing you saw was his world's largest collection of Babe Ruth memorabilia, including his first paycheck. And I was like, okay, it's cool. And then his private chef came over and said, what would you all like to have for lunch? And we're like, what's on offer? And he's like, whatever you want. And it was like, holy crap. And it so turns out that CEO was one of like those people that always had the highest executive compensation, and the board was very cozy. So, and that didn't translate into a great investment. So that's how this ESG stuff plays into investment analysis, and really just being cognizant of what most everybody up here mentioned, that just get to know your management team. If you're going to invest in a company, they're the ones that are going to dictate your outcomes often.
Can I say one last
Sure.
thing? Are we wrapping up now?
Yes.
Okay, because I wanted to leave the students with one of the most important phrases in the investment management industry. Because we had 3 buys and 2 sells, so somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong. But you never say that. You say, I wasn't wrong, I was just early. You can always extend the time horizon and say the market may have gone against me, but I'll be proven correct in the long run.
Yeah,
So always remember that. I wasn't
excuse
wrong,
making
I was
is paramount to success in this world. I want to thank the judges, Allison, Ronnie, Catherine, and Jonathan. Great job today. And thank you again to the teams. And I'll turn it over to our MC again to go on to the awarding and whatnot.
So, contrary to popular belief, I don't do stand-up like Andrea Beal does. I will say I've been plugging the student membership. I'm secretly envious of you all. I didn't start my charter until I was 28. We have programs, I think CU is accredited, right? Yeah, there's an opportunity to take level 1 at the end of your senior year. If you're interested, I highly recommend pursuing it, especially when you're in a studying mode. It gets a lot harder as you have distractions and maybe a paycheck, or there's snow or other things in your life. So if you can pursue it early on. And we have a great group of people. Half the board is here. Talk to people, network, everyone. Don't be a job seeker, but you'll find that most people like talking about themselves, right? So find out what people do. There's tons of different avenues to pursue. And most people in the society are really nice. Now there is an exception. It's this guy over here. Yeah, I thought you and I were friends because I saw him in the hallway earlier, and he said, "Man, you're doing a great job as MC. You look and sound like Ryan Seacrest." And I said, "Wow, that's so nice of you to say that I look like Ryan Seacrest." And he goes, "No, you must be losing your hearing in addition to your hair, because I said Patton Oswalt." So we're gonna do the awards. Yeah.
All right, so this is what you've all been waiting for. Thank you again. Try not to butcher the names, but apologies in advance. This is not my strong suit. So, winner is,
You want to go from bottom up, or what do we normally do?
all I have are names here. I have the team name
Okay.
and then names. So, University of Denver. I got Matthew Walker, Emily Wynn, Jose Villapanado.
Villapanada.
Yes, Panada.
Panado?
Viapando.
Villapanado.
Thank you.
Sorry, I tried
So
rolling that.
congratulations. We can give them a round of applause.
Yeah. Are they coming up, Peter?
All right.
Come up. Don't be shy.
Yeah, they didn't do that.
No.
You can save me from telling any more bad jokes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you
energy.
so much. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Congratulations. Good job. Nice job.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.